The Long Haul Podcast, America's Irish Voice. Interviews with inspiring immigrants, renowned Irish personalities, and discussions on all things Irish America. Presented by Michael Dorgan. Gavin, we're just going to move on to another big story that's been in the news the last couple of, maybe the last 2 weeks. The potential for a double header on St. Patrick's Day in Madison Square Garden. Katie Taylor and Michael Conlan. What's your latest news on the possibility of that happening? And that will be something else.
Yeah, it would be something else. Unfortunately, I don't have a scoop for you. I suppose that my latest is the same as yours, which is that it is a possibility still, and we hope it does happen for convenience sake as much as anything, because it's a kill two birds with one stone sort of trip. As you say, a biblical night for Irish boxing, where you'd have a national treasure in Katie Taylor fighting Amanda Serrano in probably her most significant fight since the 2012 Olympic final, and who again is an Irish amateur grade, finally fulfilling his destiny as he sees it, fighting for a world title, let's say, against Lee Wood. The way it's transpired, or I suppose what's generated some chat about it potentially happening, is that Conlan, who's promoted by Top Rank, was set to challenge Wood for Wood's WBA title. Wood is promoted by Matchroom. The fight went to a purse bid, which means that both promoters basically bid for the fight, bid for control of the fight, if you like, or the promotional rights to it. Matchroom, Eddie Hearn's crowd, outbid Top Rank, who promote Conlan. So basically, Hearn gets to decide where he stages it and so on. Now, you've got Conlan in New York, usually in the theatre at Madison Square Garden every Paddy's weekend. It's an institution in its own right at this point, and very much tradition for a lot of traveling Irish boxing fans. And from Hearn's perspective, he wants to do Taylor Serrano in the big room at Madison Square Garden around that time. Now, if you are looking at an Irish population of however many thousand, a portion of whom will pay to go and watch a fight, you're probably thinking, will they go to two? No, right? So they might go to Conlan because they go there every year. It'll probably be Paddy's weekend, whatever. You might have to move Taylor to early April. Again, people aren't going to fork out for it a second time, arguably. So from Hearn's perspective, why not eliminate the competition, which is what I think he did by buying the rights to this fight, for want of a better term. So you almost take that Conlan weekend under your umbrella, move the whole thing upstairs, have Taylor Serrano, biggest women's fight of all time, and also have your guy in Lee Wood against Michael Conlan, who will bring with them, what are we talking, 5,000-10,000 extra bums and seats? So it makes good business sense, and I hope I'm not talking absolute gobbledygook here. We'll find out it's in Nottingham next week or something, but It just seems to make sense, doesn't it?
Well, I was just reading earlier today, and Eddie Hearn has said it's going to be either Nottingham or Madison Square Garden. There was a couple of other arenas thrown around, and he said he's narrowing it down to two. He thinks that he can fill a stadium in Nottingham also, but he's weighing up both of them. So it's a live possibility. Whether it will happen now, I don't know. Of course, another spanner in the works could be the fact that the COVID cases in Ireland, we've got a bit of a lockdown in Ireland again. Now, if it gets worse, maybe it could throw everything up in the air again. That's something that has to be.
Just on that, Mike, I suppose, like, Katie lives in Connecticut, so that shouldn't be an issue from our point of view. And Conlan, technically speaking, is in the British jurisdiction, I suppose, in that he's living in Belfast, where things, or at least in the UK, generally speaking, things seem to be a little bit more, how would you call it? What would you say? Like, free flowing? I wouldn't say liberal, but so it should be okay.
You don't think it'll be a factor? Excellent.
I don't. Well, look, who knows with the second virus, But no, from an Irish governmental point of view or something, it shouldn't come into play at all.
The Paddy's Day fights with Mick, as you know, Gav, have been electric in the Hulu, and if you can magnify that in the Garden, which is 20,000, 21,000, I think the Hulu 6,000 or 7,000, it would be the show of all shows for the Irish population here. Hopefully it can happen. Let's dive into just the two boxes at the moment, where Conlan is in his career and where Katie is in her career. Do you want to start with Mick?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's I think a lot of people have been impatient with him in a sense, because he signed to Top Rank with such fanfare, and he had made such a cultural impact at the Rio Games, where he flipped birds at the judges. Obviously, his tournament ended in disgrace, although it wasn't his disgrace, and it's subsequently been established that a lot of the officials at those games were literally just corrupt. He was robbed of a medal ultimately. We've learned that in the McLaren report since. And Top Rank have built him slowly. I'd say that his brother Jamie, who is his manager now, and MTK Global were part of that process as well. Sometimes I think when you have a kind of a familial connection in your corner or overseeing your career, steering it, that can result in a little bit more patience than might be shown otherwise. Because naturally, big brother is going to protect little brother, you know what I mean? So what's the rush ultimately? And Conlan's still 30 years of age. He's a young man. He has probably been improving with every performance, or like vaguely improving sometimes, but generally speaking, the trajectory of his performances has been an upward curve. His last performance against TJ Downey, I would say, was the best of his professional career. Looked really good. So I think he's ready, you know. I think he would argue himself he's been ready for a couple of fights. But against Lee Wood, it's a winnable fight. Wood is very good. He has broken Irish hearts a couple of times against Phil Sutcliffe Jr., against Davion Rejoice. Yeah, I'd say Conlan is a better fundamental boxer than Wood is. If you were to ask me who carries more power, it might be Wood, but I think Conlan has enough boxing now to actually nullify a lot of that. It's a kind of fight where he might have to stink the gaff out, unfortunately, to win it, and probably box a little bit cautiously and just take the sting out of proceedings, which might not be great for 15,000 fans or whoever many are in the arena at that point. But it's a winnable fight, and it's a fight that I expect he will win.
And it's for the regular title, Gavan. What's the difference there between a regular and a world title?
I try not to pay too much attention to any of that because it's just such, like, I don't know, can I swear, but it's such baloney. But basically, there would be a champion. So it's the WBA we're talking about. There would be a champion ranked ahead of Wood. They have about fucking 5 champions in every division. It's a disgrace. It's all a money-making scheme, you know. Wood is like their second-tier champion, and Conlan would be fighting for that title. Realistically, people are just going to call it a world title, and within the kind of paradigm of modern day boxing, it pretty much is a world title, you know, because they're fighting against a good fighter, and these days a fight between 2 good fighters is usually for some sort of world title.
Awesome. So let's touch on Katie Taylor. Katie now she's fighting next month, of course, in Liverpool. She's 35, and the fight potentially in March would be against Amanda Serrano. So Amanda Serrano, the Puerto Rican Brooklyn-based fighter, who they've been back and forth for the last couple of years. No love lost between the two camps. Katie fought her sister Cindy a couple of years ago. I think we were in Philly for that fight, and there was some back and forth during the fight. So it's probably going to be one of the biggest fights in women's boxing if it materializes. Is it going to happen?
I've been fooled too many times to commit to an answer there, I suppose. But it does look as though everything Eddie Hearn is doing, everything Brian Peters is doing in Katie's team points towards it happening. I think strategically things are lining up now, or being lined up so that it happens. I don't think the money is going to be an issue this time around. Last time I was speaking to Eddie Hearn about it, he was saying that I'm just going to have to fucking pay her, you know, and like
Serrano,
basically saying Serrano, excuse me, yeah, like she's obviously. So like if people don't realize, this fight actually was agreed 18 months ago. Well, it would have been April or May 2020 for the Manchester Arena. But because of the pandemic, Serrano withdrew from the fight. She cited the fact that it would just be so much hassle getting out of the States. And because the UK was in a lockdown at the time, training would be an issue and so on. She was claiming she couldn't get into a gym in the States as well at the time, which I know like the states have different, as in individual states have different legislature and whatever. But like I know Taylor was also able to train away. So I'm not sure how much truth there was in that. I mean, look, if you want a gym badly enough, you're going to get one, right? But ultimately, it was just too much hassle for her. She withdrew, and that's how Taylor wound up fighting Delphine Pursoon in a phenomenal rematch and kind of put that rivalry to bed. So I suppose Serrano has signed on the dotted line before, and now it's an even bigger fight for her. She's got the YouTuber Jake Paul in her corner, for all intents and purposes, negotiating on her behalf this time as well. She feels as though she will be paid her worth. Eddie Hearn feels as though he has to pay her what she believes she's worth, even if it means from his point of view paying over the odds. Taylor doesn't care about really any of this. She just wants a competitive fight. I would say a big thing that tips it tips this tips things in favor of the fight happening is the fact that Serrano has watched Taylor in her last couple of fights, and Taylor hasn't looked great. Like her last fight against Jennifer Han in Leeds, I was over there. It just didn't seem like vintage Katie Taylor, really. It's a kind of an opponent that she should have been able to get rid of, even though we know she's not a power puncher, but she should have been leagues above Jennifer Han, and she was, but still was a little bit scrappy, a little bit sloppy, and didn't kind of seem her electrifying self from my vantage point anyway. Yeah. And before that, she went hell for leather with Natasha Jonas for 10 rounds. She won the fight. I thought she won it fairly comprehensively, but again, it's a bit of a war against an opponent that you would have thought beforehand she should have no problem dealing with the way she did as an amateur so many times. So, twice was it? But if you're Serrano and you're looking in those performances, you're thinking, well, my time is now. Like if we were talking about this fight 2 years ago, Mike, I would have said to you and probably you to me that Katie would win the fight fairly handily. What are we talking? Maybe 8 rounds to 2, something like that. Get over the early scares when Serrano's at her most powerful, and then just dish out an exhibition. Now, I'd probably be leaning towards Serrano winning the fight, if I'm totally honest. And that is just evidence of the fact that Taylor is 35 and she's been fighting for a long time, because I don't think Serrano has gotten any better, and yet my opinion has changed. So I guess Taylor must be either deteriorating or just hasn't looked especially good in her last 2 fights, maybe because she wasn't especially stimulated by the level of opponent or whatever. But I would say signs would point towards Serrano winning that fight now, a little bit more so, certainly, than they did a couple of years ago.
Do you think, Gavan, if it does go ahead on Paddy's Day and with Katie fighting next month, that maybe she mightn't be as, like, she's going to need to be fresh? She's going to need to be fresh coming into that fight, and she's been fighting all year, and maybe there isn't a big enough gap there if it does go ahead on Paddy's Day with the fight next month. Yeah,
I think from her point of view, she probably, I would say it was her decision. If there was any kind of debate around it, she would have just been like, no, I need to fight. Her opponent, Firuza Sharapova, isn't exactly the most dangerous opponent in the world. I mean, she's far from it, really. Taylor should deal with her quite comprehensively. And I'd imagine for her, it's just about keeping things ticking over, getting a camp in beforehand, getting out, hopefully getting only 6 or 7 rounds, but max 10. And I guess just having that little bit of freshness, like it's almost the opposite in a sense. Between December and March, I think is more than enough time for Taylor to recuperate and even take Christmas off and then go back into a camp. Whereas I think if she left it from her last fight against Han until next March, I actually think it's too big of a gap, but particularly at her age where you could stagnate very quickly or get back in the gym all of a sudden and realize, shit, I've turned old overnight almost.
Okay. Perfect, Gav. Sounds enticing. Sounds incredible if it goes ahead. We'll keep our fingers crossed if it does go ahead, and we'll get you back on the podcast to possibly preview a massive doubleheader on Paddy's Day next March. Thanks very much for coming on. Of course, Gavin Casey here. You can follow Gavin on Twitter @Gavin Casey, and he also writes for the 42.ie. Gav, I saw that you've a new book out as well with the 42.ie. Let us know what that's about.
Yeah, just behind the lines. It's called. It's a collection of our favorite stories from a year. So myself and my colleagues, I was going to say we throw it together. The boss men throw it together every year. It's in bookshops in Ireland, and you can get it on www.the42.shop as well. €12.
Awesome, Gavin. Thanks very much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Legend. I'll see you in March.
Why, Santi, my dear Annie. And that's all for this week. Let us know what you think by leaving us a comment on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter @The Long Haul Podcast, or visit our website, thelonghaulpodcast.com. Please like, rate and subscribe to the podcast. This will ensure that we can get even more episodes to you more often. You can check out all of our previous podcasts on thelonghaulpodcast.com, where we also have post-match interviews and reports on all of this year's New York GA finals. And of course, a great story on the near 150 Irish runners who completed the New York City Marathon last Sunday. You can also read about other Irish American sports stories and other news items on this site. Slán go fóill, and thanks for listening. Oh, you New York girls, can you dance the polka? And when we got inside the house, the drinks were passed around. The liquor was so awful strong, my head went round.